At Restored, we want to create a culture of dedicated dependence. I'm sitting in the very first building that Restored met in, where we held some of the very first prayer meetings. A group of our members were so passionate about prayer, they looked back at the ministry of Charles Spurgeon, a great preacher in church history, that had a group of people that would actually gather in the boiler room of his church to pray all throughout his sermons that the Holy Spirit would work. Having that same type of heart, these people gathered in this room to pray every single Sunday for God to work, for the gospel to go forward, and for the Holy Spirit to change lives. I look back and I see that all that God has done throughout the story of Restored, and it really is that Jesus has delivered on his promise. Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." So we want to be dedicated to dependence on Jesus, who made that promise and who continues to empower us through his Holy Spirit. We don't want people to look at Restored and think that Restored is what it is or is where it is simply because of a strong vision, a great strategy, or a strong work ethic. No, we want people to look at Restored and the story of it, the leaders who team up to make it possible, and we want them to see that the Holy Spirit is working in us and through us as we are dedicated to leading and serving out of a dependence on Jesus to do what we could never do on our own. The reality is, I'm not a good enough leader to change anybody, and neither are you. There is nothing that we can humanly manufacture that produces such a strong supernatural change that someone who formerly worshiped Satan now follows Jesus. She walked out of our church building and she threw her satanic Bible in the dumpster. That tells me that I need to stay dedicated to dependence on God. And I hope that as you lead and you serve, that you'll get really practical about how you can be dedicated to dependence on God. Here's a few ways you can do that. Make prayer a priority. Pray all throughout the week for the opportunities that God is bringing to you. Pray with your teams. And don't just pray as a cursory thing to check a box. Pray because you actually believe that you desperately need God to work. When people tell you how great you are or what great results you or your team are seeing, remind them that you're dedicated to dependence on Jesus and Jesus is simply working in you and through you. Stay humble and remember that it's not about you. It never should be about you. And it's not you who's producing any of the results that you might be seeing in your particular ministry. It's God working in you and through you. Be humble enough to acknowledge that and be grateful enough that God has allowed you to play a small part in something much larger that he's doing. The only way that Restored is ever going to continue to be effective in the mission that Jesus is given to us, is if we as a group of people are hyper intentional about being dedicated to dependence on Jesus rather than ourselves.